Welcome, everyone, to episode 362 of Just Joshing. This is this week's story time. The Cloud Diver is back. And by the time this is out, I will have Cloud Diver officially gone through the Kindle process. I will have it go through the Kobo process probably in a few more days. But yeah, the book's done. It's ready to go. And yeah, I was going to have it done yesterday. I ended up doing my first ever 4-hour podcast interview. I have a lot more respect for Joe. Awesome guest. We could have easily talked for another hour. There was a lot more stuff we could have covered. Amazing man, and I'll be talking more about him going forward when the episodes air. But it was a hell of a conversation. It was a hell of an opportunity. It kind of fell into my lap, and I kind of took advantage of it. But it meant that it put me a day behind where I was originally planning on being. It's a good reason not to be a little late, I think. I got a couple more announcements. Like I said, I'm going to be 1,000 books of this. That's my goal. Personally, that is the mantra and goal I have with the Cloud Diver. I hope you guys have been enjoying the audio breed. I've been trying different things out, and I hope you guys have been appreciating it. But I'm not alone this week. I should also introduce my guest. Danika Stone. Danika Stone is reading from her book too. I get a kick out of her. I really do. I think ever since I met her at When Words Collide, she's been fun to follow. She's been fun to make friends with because she's just doing cool things and she's living the life she wants to live, and I admire that very, very much. And I'm thankful she chose to come here and do some reading. I also want to do a quick little thank you to the romance readers last week. I will do another romance one. Somewhere down the road, I'm going to do another one, and I'm going to let people get involved. It's an opportunity to do something a little bit different, and I'll probably do something like that or another genre when I finish chapter 4. I like the idea of taking a break just to do some stuff. Okay, let's just get to my reading, and then from there we'll talk about. Then we'll get other stuff. All right.
This episode of Just Joshing is sponsored by Indie Imprint. Indie Imprint supports creators by creators. Whether you are writing a book or creating a video game, Indie Imprint works with its clients to produce, edit, and present their projects to the world. For more information, check out their website at www.indieimprint.com.
The Cloud Diver, Level 1-3, Chapter 1, Feed VoidLife. G. Bender at G. Bender CEO. VoidLife verified. Hi all, I am here to answer all your questions. Make them good. Smiley face. My body, particularly my knees and ankles, protested mildly to the abuse I was putting it through. We were required to exercise every day per VoidLife health regulations. But it's another thing to use those muscles to escape certain death. She didn't seem to have any problems. Her run was nearly as graceful as it had been when we were in the library. She had no gunblade here, but there was some kind of specialized handgun holstered to the side of her pouch. The magnum she had fired point blank between Chester's eyes still smoked from the discharge. Despite the fact that I had watched him topple to the bottom of the building, there was urgency in her movements. I wasn't out of danger yet. It figures that they're after you, she said without slowing down a beat. They. The Ouroboros cartel, she answered. We'll talk later. For now, we move. Stay with me. If I had been under any other circumstances, I would be failing miserably. With certain death behind me, it was so much easier, pain and all, to keep going. Yet, for all our speed, that feeling of dread never went away. For all the size and scope of the VoidLife building, there was only so many spaces we could go. We could hear a loud thunk, thunk, thunk behind us. Chester was climbing back up. The thunks were the liquid metal that gave him life crunching into the side of the building. He was gaining. The end of the hall back inside the building came far too soon. A giant wall greeted us there with a picture of VoidLife's glorious founder, G. Gregory Bender, pointing his stubby nose at us and smiling that vacant smile people have when they're being forced to stand still for hours at a time. The thunk stopped, so we turned and saw him. What was left of him, anyway, which was far more robot than man at this point. His face and bone structure looked crushed. What remained of the skull resembled something far more liquid than solid. Brains and bone had mixed into some unnatural primordial soup for all to gaze and wonder upon. The rest of his body wasn't much better. Bones protruded out of the joints, veins and blood gushed everywhere. Chester's walk resembled more of a puppet on broken strings than anything man or beast. For all that, silver mercury froze in the blood and brain and coated Chester, mending the damage at an exponential rate. In just a few short days, Chester would be back to his old self, muttering brains on command. "We're trapped," I screamed. "No," Gunblade replied. "Do you not see what I see?" "Probably not," she grinned. "He survived a fall from how many stories and is still after us?" "Indeed." She yawned. She actually yawned, as if life and death weren't all around us at this instant. "How can you be so indifferent?" She no longer seemed interested in replying as she turned her attention to Chester, stretching her neck and shoulders as she moved towards him. For his part, Chester strung along, matching her speed and casualness until they paused in front of each other a few feet away. The two combatants stared each other down, waiting for the other to make the first move. Chester tilted his head in confusion again. Gunblade's fingers caressed the holster of a gun. All the while, her eyes never left Chester. There was no yawn or smile on his face, just an intensity waiting to be uncorked. Both stood still. She grinned. He charged. Bender's picture exploded. I shrieked and stumbled away from the picture of Bender in the wall as it crumbled to the sudden carnage. Chester staggered about, trying to regain his footing. Before he found it, Gunblade took the gun from her holster and fired, the bullet finding its mark again between Chester's eyes. Electric sparks danced where the shrapnel lodged itself in his liquid skull, metal boiling from the discharge. His eyes rolled to the back of his head and he collapsed to the ground. "Move!" she howled as I attempted to climb back to my feet. I wasn't going fast enough for her purposes, as I heard her growl and felt her push me to the section behind the former wall. Stairs magically revealed themselves, along with the whole other section to the VoidLife building I never knew existed. She ushered me towards this strange new secret. All my aches and pains returned me tenfold to be jaunted down the stairs 2 and 3 at a time for what seemed like an endless pursuit. All for a while, all seemed quiet. My adrenaline slowed down and my pain intensified. We came to another flaming pile of debris that had once been a wall. I wondered how that could have been made, and then I noticed her walk through it without no surprise. It occurred to me that she had made this hole coming into this building. She slowed down and stepped into the hole. I followed. Once we were on the inside, she pulled out a cube like the one I'd seen in the library. This one had a button on one side. She rolled her thumb over the button and pressed it. Another explosion thundered behind me. All the scares we escaped through are now pure void. A loud thud reverberated throughout the building, and the structure shuddered, expelling part of itself. People came out of their quarters on that floor to witness the destruction. "Stop gawking and start running," she instructed. I can hear the implied "or else" in her voice. It made me much more willing to cooperate, but I have to admit that I wanted to be gawking as much as the rest of the people on this floor. Strangers I'd never realized were on this floor were going back to the way we came, marveling at our path of carnage. I had no idea who any of these people were. Dozens and dozens of fellow employees I never knew existed seemed to be meeting each other for the first time. It hit me right there just how isolated I was. I had seen these people, stood beside them in an elevator, and not once did I ever greet them or ask about their lives. An even sadder thought occurred to me. They did the same thing. What else happened in this building every day? Had our worlds gotten so small? Had mine? As we strolled into the elevator and started our descent into the main floor, I saw her hesitate for the first time. She just stopped and shrunk into herself for a second as she was trying to regain composure. Something had thrown her off, but what? "We're not out of the woods just yet, Diver," she cautioned. "What do you mean? We still need to deal with security. That zombie Borg won't be giving us any trouble for a while, but since I just blew up a piece of the building, they'll be pursuing us from here." "You have a plan?" I gulped. "Of course," she said with dismissal. "For now, I'm trying to get us to as low a floor as we can before the elevator jerked to an abrupt stop as the lights went out." "Sooner than I expected," she conceded. "Now comes the hard part." Cloud Diver, Level 1-3, Chapter 2. Feed VoidLife. G. Bender CEO at G. Bender CEO, VoidLife verified. "I am an evil robot. Smiley face, JK. Or am I? Quoted tweet at Cyberworld 101. How do you manage to keep yourself so fit? I want to go home. I mean, I know there's no chance of that. My apartment and what meager possessions I had were probably now confiscated by VoidLife security. My stuff will dwell in the locker while they investigate me, and, after a certain amount of time has passed, they'll auction it off as my contract dictated in the event of termination. It just occurred to me that I was fired from my job. The strange things that sink in when you're stuck in a powerless elevator in a corporate building. The fact that my old life was now a cinder of the past sunk in. In its place was certain death, zombie robot mobsters, a missing friend, and me with a crazy chick with a gun in a powerless elevator. Hoist me up, Gunblade said. Excuse me? I blinked. Give me a boost. Oh. I went to grab her waist awkwardly. It had been a long time since I've held a woman like that. I wasn't sure what the proper protocol was. Divers. Gunblade rolled her eyes and sighed. What? Just shut up and help. Here. She adjusted my hand so they looked like a proper boost. Firm up your stance. You need to support me until I open the hatch. I want to say that I boosted her with ease, but the truth was that I stumbled and fell on my butt, aggravating my already sore body. Somebody hasn't been keeping up with their daily conditioning, Gunblade tisk. Embarrassed, I tried to cover my ineptitude with bravado. I can do it! Are you sure? The way she said it left me little doubt that she didn't believe it, which only pumped me up more. I nodded and she shrugged. I'm not sure how this happened, but the moment her foot went into my hands, I slipped. I collapsed to the ground like I'd been hit with a haymaker, rather than just falling on my own clumsiness. For her part, Gunblade just tissed again and looked up at the top of the elevator. Biting her lip, she looked up at her obstacle and looked down at me and sighed. Let's try shoulders then. Can you do shoulders? I groaned. After what just happened, I wasn't sure I could do anything, but I nodded. The top of the elevator had to be opened. I crouched down and braced myself. Gunblade positioning itself was easier than I expected. All that was left to do was stand up. How hard could that be? My mistake was trying to move up too fast. It forced Gunblade to shield her head from meeting the middle top of the elevator, and in doing so, she shifted her weight. I teetered and tottered for an internal 3 seconds before I steadied. All my focus turned to standing still and breathing. I repeated a "you got this" mantra over and over in my brain. Gunblade managed to unhinge the top elevator door and the emergency exit opened. She hoisted herself up through it with ease. Shortly after, she disappeared through the hatch and a ladder dropped from the top. I grabbed it and climbed clumsily through the exit. Once I got my footing on the roof of the elevator, I looked up. The floor above taunted us from its horizon. I could see the outline of a shut elevator door letting in drops of light from the distance. I could see the cables holding our transport up, straining just slightly at standing still. My mind imagined falling to a gruesome death, and I gulped. I could see nothing beneath us. The walls were seamless. There was no foothold or rock wall to climb. Somehow we had to fight our way to the door. Not too bad, Gunblade said while she appraised the situation. We can get up there. What floor is that? The 13th floor. Well, 14th actually, but I like to think of it as 13. She indicated the number above the door. I groaned. I was just starting to despise that particular numerical value. Nothing good came from my experience with it. How are we going to get there? I have rope, she answered, pulling out a grapple gun from behind her back. I had imagined that the sword-like thing was a gunblade, yet somehow this was there instead. She gripped the gun and braced it against her shoulder, bending to a knee as she fired. The grabbing clunked on target. She then clicked on the trigger and I watched the rope start to tauten. She wrapped the giant gun around the elevator cable and then finished tightening our means of escape. I groaned. Salvation would come from my least favorite physical activity. You mean we have to climb? I groaned some more. Thoughts of high school gym class came tumbling back to me at the prospect of climbing. I stomped, feeling the resounding metal thud at the bottom of my soul. There would be no crash mat and humiliation if I fell from the rope this time. Only pain. I had to bolster myself up. I considered the rope with the anchor attached to the front latch to the bottom of the door. She tied the other end of the rope to the ladder from the elevator and tightened until she could twang it to her satisfaction. From there, she scaled the rope with speed and grace. It wasn't a complete cakewalk for her to climb, but she did it. One thing was for sure. It was better than what I was going to do. As she stood up at the door of the 13th floor, I tested the rope, which responded to me with a near perfect amount of twang and tightness. High school stayed on my mind. Every time young Johnny had tumbled to his doom, replayed itself in my mind. I gulped. I really didn't want to do this, but didn't see any other good choice. Unlike high school, there would be no knots to aid my ascent. Okay, Johnny, I told myself, you can do this. Another voice disagreed. This voice was connected to a huge, demon ugly orangutan named Jim Stewart, the bully who had laughed at all my failures with the rope back in high school. Today he emerged from my stream of consciousness, laughing at me still. You're just gonna fall again, he hooted. I knew this was impossible. There would be no steroid reject waiting to steal my lunch money from my prone, defeated body if I failed this time. I tried to pull myself up, and, to my pleasant surprise, I moved. These exercises I didn't do enough had paid off a little bit with the muscle memory. I felt my confidence rise with each progression, but even so, my heart thudded inside my chest and I could feel the strain on my shoulders as my body left the safe confines of the metal floor and got closer and closer to the door. Still, this was already going better than expected. I mocked the voice that resembled my high school nemesis. "You see, Jimmy," I told him, "I can do this." Jimmy didn't take too kindly at me bad-mouthing him. "Oh, yeah?" Looked down. I listened to him. Big mistake. Egads! How had I gotten so far up? The room started to dim and I became a little light hanging up there. I couldn't do this. What was I doing here? "Do I have to count to 5 again?" I heard a very stern voice say from above me. A chill went down my spine. The last time she had counted to 5 resulted in me begging for my life in the library. I couldn't fathom what she'd do here. 1. "Oh, God!" I heard myself think. "She's already counting." I swore that my limbs reacted on their own accord. The sound of the gun being loaded as Jimmy and I watched her do it made both me and my imaginary voice squeal. She wasn't going to kill me, was she? Jimmy didn't bother to wait for another number to be counted. He managed to gulp and disappear before she got any farther. 2. A flick of a blade came out, and she whistled. Gunblade's footsteps sunk in my brain with slow, deliberate precision. She wouldn't cut the rope, would she? Maybe. My heart led me on with its sheer trumpet of panic. With each note, I climbed faster, with more determination and focus. She would keep counting if I didn't. Would Gunblade start gnawing at the ropes? What would happen when the whistle died? My arms moved by their own accord. Like me, they wanted to live. It was not going to end here. Gunblade never made it to 3. Instead, I arrived like a mighty storm, and she grabbed me, hoisted me up with incredible strength, and pulled me in with her into the 13th floor. "Glad you could make it." She had a twinkle of her eye and amusement on her face as she pulled me in. "So what's next?" I asked, my heart still pounding. "The other stairwell." "Other stairwell?" I felt myself growing again. 13 floors of stairs awaited me to scale down. It didn't seem fair. Adventure, I thought to myself, was far too physical. I love that count to 5 scene. I really, really do. Gunblade and Johnny is a very fun dynamic for me to write, and I love the fact that for the rest of the series, I get to pretty much write this dynamic the whole time. It's been a blast. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy writing Johnny. He's definitely like my favorite coward. But anyway, the book is Switchback. The author is Danika Stone. She's awesome, and here's her reading. And when it's over, we'll talk about what's coming up this week. All right? All right.
The reading I'm going to do for you is from Edge of Wild. It's the first of my Waterton series. Edge of Wild is book 1. The Dark Divide is book 2. And Fall of Night, which comes out in November, is book 3. And that finishes off the trilogy. So I'm going to do a reading starting right at the beginning so you can get a sense of what's happening in this little town. Prologue. Jeff was packing to leave when he heard the noise outside the window. It was a low keening sound, the sort of moan that would have sent a city slicker like him running a year ago. But not now. No, tonight he picked up the wooden bat next to the door and walked out onto the porch. Jeff's time in the mountains had changed him. He was far more confident in who he was nowadays. The solitude of Waterton had done that. Other changes were less certain. He was preparing to throw away a career at Cold Creek Enterprises for one. And last spring, he would have had misgivings about walking out into the darkness after hearing something. Tonight, he did it without a second thought. He stood, staring out into the sooty black, waiting. The sound didn't return, but his mind was abuzz with it. Jeff replayed it over and over, subtly adding to it, filtering it, until he was certain Tucker's whine was somewhere in the remembered sound. Jeff had bought the cougar hound pup from a local rancher last spring, when the problems had begun. Cougars can be trouble round these parts, a park warden had warned him, when the bloody kill had appeared on this very porch. A dog seemed like the best way to deal with it. Jeff hadn't expected to love the long-eared mutt so much. The dog had disappeared a week ago. In the darkness, far beyond the porch's golden light, a branch broke. "Tucker?" Jeff called, his hand tightening on the bat. "That you, boy?" He whistled, but there was no response. Jeff turned in a slow circle, taking in the protective perimeter of porch light, and the door to the house, still ajar, and the warm light of the kitchen. Uncurtained windows framed the room beyond. Jeff frowned. A year in the mountains had made him indifferent to privacy. Another branch broke, this time a little further out, nearer to the garage. "Tuck?" Jeff stepped down into the yard, heart pounding. Coming here had been a lifetime opportunity. Project manager for the building of the Whitewater Lodge, the biggest hotel complex the hamlet had ever seen. Jeff wished he'd known how difficult the goal would be to accomplish. The issues had started immediately, weather putting the project weeks behind schedule. The construction crew had been outsourced from Calgary, but the men hadn't been prepared for building in extreme mountain conditions. "No one builds in the winter." The townsfolk smirked. Pipes burst. Workers quit. Still, Jeff pushed forward. And then the other things began. In the darkness, something moved. Whatever it was had circled round the far side of the garage, keeping to the shadows. The presence was uneasy, and so was he. Rolling sweaty fingers over the bat's grip, Jeff moved in. This time, he would know. Jeff's lifetime opportunity had turned into a nightmare. Even after the snowy weather had cleared, the troubles continued. Everything that could go wrong with the unfinished hotel had. He had opened one wing of the lodge, despite misgivings. It was a disaster. Balancing that small section of rooms while finishing the remaining two wings was impossible. He'd borrowed money to finish, but the loan wasn't nearly enough. The rest of the town ran as if it was still 1950. The townsfolk didn't like him, didn't want him here. Warden Grant McNeely had blamed a cougar for the dead animal on his porch. But there'd been the trouble with broken cabin windows, the wind, and then the break-ins at the Whitewater Lodge, seasonal workers. All of it conveniently discredited, but Jeff didn't believe that anymore. Not after Tucker had disappeared off the chain in the yard last week. He knew the reason now. Someone wanted him out. Jeff made almost a complete circuit of the yard, pushing further into the darkness, but the bushes were silent. He whistled once more, knowing there'd be no answer, and then stopped, taut with frustration. With a sigh, he turned back around and froze. A shadowy figure stood on the porch. Jeff took a shaky breath, lifting the end of the bat and widening his stance. With the light behind, he couldn't see who it was. "What do you want?" he called. The figure on the porch smiled, teeth white against the shadows. "Just to talk." Chapter 1. Love is a fire, but whether it's going to warm your hearth or burn down your house, you can never tell. Joan Crawford. Louise Newman always knew she was different than the other children. It wasn't a question. She just was. As far back as she could remember, her sleep was interrupted by dreams so real they seemed alive. Bits and pieces of other lives intruded into her mind after she woke, their voices whispering to her. I dreamed of a woman with eyes too full of water, 5-year-old Louise announced one morning. She walked out into Emerald Bay and tried to drink the lake. Louise, her mother gasped, hand covering her heart. You shouldn't say such things. People tried to pull her out, Louise said, pointing to the window and the flat shimmer of the water beyond. But she drowned anyway. I saw it. Her mother looked from Louise to her husband, to the butt Sudan in the corner of the room. Memories of another life mean you've come back for a reason, she said warily. Lou Newman, a self-declared atheist, lifted his gaze from the plate and grimaced. Hardly, Yuki. Kids have crazy dreams. Louise just has an overactive imagination. But it wasn't a dream, she argued. It was real, Daddy. I remember. Well, just don't go around telling everyone, he said. They'll think you're off your rocker, baby. There were other things that Louise just knew, like the man down the street who had a different family in a different town, and her classmate who'd killed his pet rabbit in the shed, then lied and said it had run away. Each realization separated young Louise from her peers, each memory that wasn't her own, pulling her a little further to the side. Teased for her peculiar differences, she became an observer of life's chaos rather than a participant. Her mother was open to her daughter's visions, though Louise knew that they worried her. You need to make sure you walk the right path, Yuki said. Even at the hardest times, Louise tried to remember that. Louise attended Waterton's 2-room school until 6th grade, its highest level. For the remainder of her childhood, she was shuttled to Cardston, the nearest town with a school. Trapped on a school bus for an hour each morning and each evening, she devoured book after book. She explored 100 worlds, indifferent to her peers and the passing of the universe. She went through her parents' bookshelves, moving on to the school's small library, then Cardston's public library, and onward from there, receiving tomes via interlibrary loans as years passed. She lived through these stories, her mind lost in the subtle variation of human existence. She understood them, could see them, knew them. The belief that she had been born hundreds of times before never wavered. She left Waterton the summer after graduating from high school, taking courses at the University of Alberta with the anxious feeling that she shouldn't be there. Eventually, the emotion settled like a stone deep in her chest, leaving her jumping every time the phone rang in the apartment. A few weeks after Christmas, Yuki was diagnosed with breast cancer. Louise came home, knowing it was to stay. Spring brought radiation treatments and chemotherapy, along with songbirds and wildflowers. Summer added tourists into the mix. Louise helped her father with the garage during the day and helped her mother with dyeing at night. She knew the end was near, just as she knew she needed to be there at her mother's side. And so she did what she'd been called to do, hold Yuki's hand as she passed from this world to the next. What's the point? Her father muttered brokenly the day of the funeral. In the last months, his shoulders had curled like an autumn leaf. The point is that we're not alive unless we also die, Louise said. Heartbroken, she lifted the urn, spreading her mother's ashes into the wind, watching them dance like smoke, then disappear across the surface of Upper Waterton Lake. Her father never answered. Years passed, and Louise settled into the role life had given her. She took lovers and let them go, made friends and watched them leave the town behind. The stories she read became a lens through which to understand the world. Disconnected, she stayed on the outside of conflict, offering words of solace and hope to those she loved. It put her on the edge of life, looking inward, rather than fording the stream with the rest. By the time her father joined his wife in the next world, and Louise was the only Lou in town, she'd more than accepted that this was her place. The townsfolk, with their long-standing ways and hard-won trust, were her family. The summer visitors, with their chaotic lives and endless troubles, were her calling. And, for the most part, she was happy. When Richard Evans arrived in Waterton in mid-April 1999, the town was shrouded in white. Dressed for the gray dullness of New York spring, his feet were soaked the moment he climbed out of his car. The parking lot of the newly constructed hotel was covered in ankle-deep slush, the open sign flashing like a beacon in the mid-afternoon gloom. Wind howled through tall pine trees, picking up bits of snow and casting them like pebbles against anything solid. Squinting, he did a quick survey of his home for the next 6 months. Barren, hardly covered it. Fuck it all. The words were dashed away by the icy breeze, leaving only the shape of the sound behind. While the other Canadian communities Rich had driven through looked like the America he'd left, the town of Waterton was strangely out of time. The Rocky Mountains formed a hollow bowl in which the park was situated, huddled against the border with the United States. A chain of lakes flowed between craggy precipices. It was fringed by an elbow of flat land which held a scattering of buildings. Pockets of trees appeared between the houses, the forest greedily encroaching on civilization. While most buildings were quaint and small, built in the Alpine style, a few others were heavy-set log cabins with rotting, moss-covered roofs, heaving under advanced age. By comparison, the unfinished Whitewater Lodge, the center point in town, was a glaring edifice to modernity. The outer sea of the mountain hamlet wrapped the newly built lodge like arms. These appendages were connected by the clasped hands of a small business center, the line of Cameron Creek crossing through it like the Cédille on a French sea. It was surrounded by a wall of trees. For visitors, Waterton was a sparkling gem in the unexpected setting of the Rockies, untouched and pure. But Rich cared for none of its beauty. He was here for a job, nothing else. The silvered, desolate beauty of the landscape was lost on him. Ears burning with frostbite, Rich headed to the trunk. His jacket, the heaviest he owned, was cut through by daggers of wind. The gusts sharpened as they descended down rocky cliffs and across the icy lake. He'd been warned that spring came late to the Rockies, even here in the southern end of Canada. With numbed fingers, he tugged his laptop and suitcase from the sport car's shallow trunk and trudged up the slick path to the main building. He already wanted to go home. The strains of The Price is Right theme song filled Rich's ears as he swung open the front door. There was no doorman to take his bags, no welcoming hubbub of happy guests. The couches on either side of the stone fireplace were bare. The sole occupant of the shabbily decorated great room was a young woman who sat behind the counter, beer can in hand. "Mr. Evans!" the night clerk squeaked in horror. "You're early!" Rich grimaced. This was the mess that his predecessor, Jeff Chan, had left behind when he'd abandoned his post last fall. The young woman was off the stool, had tucked the open beer under the counter, and flicked off the television behind her before he'd made it to off the welcome mat. She ran a quick hand over her clothes, doing up a button on her blazer, while he took the few short steps up to the counter. "We were told you'd be here in the morning," she said anxiously. "I didn't realize that flights came into Lethbridge this late." "They don't," he said, gaze flicking to her name tag. "Amanda. I drove." Her lashes flared wide. All the way from New York? No, he growled. I flew into Calgary, picked up my car, and drove the rest of the way. Well, I'm glad the weather cooperated for you, she said, falsely bright. There's been a lot of snow this year. The upper lake froze over. Rich made a noise that could have been an answer or an expression of irritation. He dropped his bags on the floor with a thud, layering the rug with a coating of snow. Key, he snapped. Amanda's expression wavered. Key to my room, he said, hand outstretched. I'm here for the next 6 months. I'm not sleeping in a tent. She dug through a nearby drawer, pulling out a rusted skeleton key. Aha, Amanda said. There it is. Rich frowned down at it. This isn't a room key. She giggled, leaning onto the counter so that her cleavage thrust forward. Of course not, Mr. Evans. It's the manager's cottage. You know, the place they bought when this old thing, she swirled her hands above her head, was getting finished. Whitewater has a separate house for the manager? Not a house, she purred. A cabin. Chapter 2. Dawn came too quickly, and Rich struggled to awaken when the alarm went off. He shaved and showered, putting on his second-best suit and heaviest topcoat, then headed out into the early morning haze. Around him, sun-tipped ridges soared, looming golden over the far southern edge of the town where the manager's cabin was located. He shielded his eyes, taking in his home for the foreseeable future. His was the last cabin before the campground. Beyond that was untouched forest. The 2-story house had cross-timbered peaks and faded stucco, its roof covered with uneven cedar shakes. Across the majestic sky, it looked like a doll's house. While at 8 blocks away, dead center in the target of the small town, the straight angles and bold lines of the newly constructed Whitewater Lodge perched like an ungainly bird against the backdrop of lofty peaks. It looked, Rich decided, like an unfinished drawing from a discarded Frank Lloyd Wright sketchbook, but even from this distance, dark blotches on the surface marred the illusion of perfection. Pieces of siding were peeling under the onslaught of wind. Seeing it, Rich grimaced. He buttoned his coat and trudged down the front steps. What he saw beyond the porch had him stumbling to a stop. There were footprints in the snow. His eyes widened in indignation. The path moved from the road up to the porch, and then, most disturbingly, around the house. There wasn't a fence on the property, so it wasn't exactly trespassing, but the fact that someone had come onto the lot irritated him. He stood for several seconds, weighing whether to walk or drive. Before he decided, something moved through the bushes at the side of his property, chittering angrily. The sound startled him into action. He jogged across this yard, snow leaching over the sides of his shoes and past the thin layer of his socks. I'll deal with it when I get home, he muttered, sliding the key into the car's door and climbing inside. He didn't return for 16 hours. By that time, the restless wind had shaped the snow into soft dunes, the area where the footprints had crossed the lot scoured bare. Rich followed the edge of the shadowy porch, searching for a hint of the intruder's tracks. Oh, for Christ's sake, he snarled. The spot around the windows was covered by drifted snow, and any hopes that the police might take impressions of the footprints was quickly dashed. Instead, Rich made a mental note to check out the cabin's security systems and headed inside. That thought was quickly lost under a backlog of tasks, organizing the staff timesheets, ordering items for the upcoming long weekend, and reviewing the previous winter's ledgers. By the time he fell asleep, still clothed, the footprints and any concerns from them were long buried. It took Rich less than a week to realize that this job was going to be a hell of a lot more difficult than he'd expected. With the last summer's fiasco, one wing of the hotel open, while the rest were a drain on any revenue, followed by Chan's disappearance in the fall, he had expected the position to be a challenge. He hadn't realized he'd have the entire town to contend with. With the hotel finally complete, roughed in, his mind corrected, he was there to get this new business off the ground for the coming summer. It should have been a simple task. The park was in a pristine spot, and no one had taken advantage of the potential revenue. There were no 4- or 5-star hotels in Waterton. Rich figured even 3 stars was pushing their ranking, and that meant that the wealthiest visitors simply didn't stay. They drifted in, stayed a night at the archaic Prince of Wales Hotel, located high on a hill overlooking the town, then left again, happy to be on their way. Rich intended to change this. The problem was Waterton itself. The mountains surrounding it were a barrier to the rest of the world, blocking most cell phone reception and causing insurmountable issues with internet access and cable television. The third night after arriving, he'd attended his first Chamber of Commerce meeting, where a bed and breakfast owner named Susan Varley had growled that people came to escape from their lives. "Like a cruise ship," she said, her wrinkled face grooved with annoyance. "You don't want to bring in the troubles from the outside world." The woman's grandmotherly appearance was at odds with her acid tongue. "This town is hardly a cruise liner," he retorted, "and even out on a ship in the middle of nowhere, you can certainly have access to the internet if you want to pay for it." With that, the room erupted into chaos, and the rest of the discussion splintered into 1,000 different lines. A stout businesswoman with a penchant for lurid clothing was the only one who'd spoken to him after that. Everyone else had been stone-faced after the meeting was adjourned. No one had shaken his hand. Rich wasn't making friends, but he didn't care. His job was to drag the Whitewater Lodge into the 21st century by the time the millennium arrived. Having driven there, Rich knew the area was surrounded by prairie, the nearest city, which boasted less than 80,000 people, an hour and a half away. Technology was antiquated, and nothing satellite-related worked with any certainty. The mountains were too high, and the businesses too low. Waterton wasn't like Banff, with the quick draw from Calgary, or like Denver, which was a city unto itself. This place was a trap. It was pristine, but stark, the walls too high to look over to see the gold mine inside. Or the rotten core, Rich thought in disgust. But that was okay, he decided. He'd hate it, but he'd do it anyhow. That was what he'd been hired to do, after all.
And that was Danika Stone. The book is Switchback. It's available now. Danika, thank you very, very much for coming on my show. I appreciate you, and hopefully you'll get to come do another interview again somewhere down the road when your next book is out. And that, guys, is amazing. So, next week there's going to be 3 episodes, and then the week following there's going to be 4 episodes. I'm going to need to drink very heavily on my 4th one. That's because I'm going to be doing something very special with Sophia Evangelina. It's not going to be the typical interview I've done in the past. It's going to be something completely different. It's a past, present, future. You're going to hear where Sophia came from. You're going to hear what she's doing now, and hear where she wants to go. And it's going to be an amazing thing. It's kind of like I said, been my dream to do this for just creators in general. I think I truly do believe people sell themselves short, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody else. By the way, I do it all the time. But the thing of it is, she's uber talented, and she's giving me a really cool opportunity. And May 17th at 7 p.m. Pacific time, 10 p.m. Eastern time, you will get the opportunity to actually see my interview with Sophia Evangeline, as it will be live. It'll be my first live Zoomcast, just joshing. It'll be episode 369, it looks like. I might actually do 5 that. Oh god. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of episodes that week. I'm going to be doing a lot, but episode 369 is going to be the Sophia Evangelina special. It is definitely going to be a one-of-a-kind interview, and I'm really excited about it. And it will be May 17th. And May 16th is going to be the launch of my book. Crazy. I am never sleeping again. That's just how this is going to work. I'm never, ever going to sleep again. But guys, for now, thank you very much for listening to this week's episode of Just Joshing. If you want to support the podcast, you can do so a bunch of different ways. Subscribe to the podcast. I'm on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher. You can listen to me. You can hear me out. Just get involved with just my various products. And if you like them, share them around other people. Let people know I'm out there. If you don't like them, don't tell anybody. I understand. I promise. I really, really do. My books, The Watcher, Storm Dancer, Wandering God, are available at Mirrorwell Publishing. Right now at Mirrorwell Publishing, you can get one of them for free as an ebook. You just simply go to mirrorwellpublishing.com, shop in their store, use the free code, and you can get a free copy of The Watcher. You'll love it. Cloud Diver, May 16th. If the order form isn't up by the time this episode airs, it will be up by Wednesday at the absolute latest. I'm really, really excited about it. So thank you very, 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 very much, guys, for your support in that. If you guys want to pre-order that book, that would be great. It'll be $2, $1.99 to be perfectly exact and final, and it will be great. I promise you this book's amazing. If you guys have been reading it up until this point, I hope you guys have been enjoying it. Okay, my Twitter, Instagram is jpentaloresco. My newsletter, there's a link provided there if you want to subscribe and get some more cool content that's not available anywhere else. Come to my newsletter. There's all kinds of cool goodies always going in there. My merchandise is jpentaloresco.redbubble.com. My YouTube channel is Joshua Pentaloresco. My Facebook page is Joshua Pentaloresco Author Podcaster. Stay inspired, guys. It's going to be a great ride from here on in. Okay? Okay.
Josh.